Welcome back. The Department of Justice arresting another Chinese scientist from Wuhan, charged with smuggling biological materials into America and making false statements to federal agents. The student accused of shipping 4 packages of the pathogen to the University of Michigan, both this year and last year, where she was planning on doing research, she claimed. This, the 3rd Chinese national charged with agroterrorism in recent weeks. Joining me now is Iowa Congressman Nunn. Congressman, thanks very much for being here. And you say Chinese agroterrorism in the heartland is threatening the U.S. food supply. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Maria, you're absolutely right. Look, this is the 3rd individual that the FBI has been able to identify on U.S. soil, trying to find ways to inject themselves into the U.S. agricultural supply. The fungus that was mentioned earlier that was discovered in Michigan labs would have wiped out corn, wheat, barley, rice. This would have left us, as the United States, highly vulnerable to a food shortage and crisis. When this exact fungus broke out in 1996 in the U.S., it cost billions of dollars. In today's terms, that could be devastating to our ag producers. And worst of all, Maria, this isn't the first time they've done it. In my home district in Iowa, all the way back in 2011, we saw Chinese nationals come to the United States, go to a U.S. test field, and steal corn kernels out of a test field to try and take back to China. Thankfully, the FBI stopped them as well back then, but it took us almost 5 years to be able to prosecute them. It's one of the reasons I'm leading legislation now to be able to stop this today and prevent the type of devastation that things like COVID did to the human population, this could do to our crop situation.
Well, this is incredible. And we know that at least one of these individuals signed a pledge to follow the values of Mao Zedong and be in line with the Communist Party of China. Can you make the connection that the CCP is behind this?
Look, I spent the bulk of my career as a counterintelligence officer working operations out of China. I feel very confident that not only is the Chinese behind this, they are directing these type of operations. We've seen it time and time again here. In the last year alone, the 3 largest cyber attacks have all been directed directly by the Ministry of State Security within China, and they've gone after things like agricultural intellectual property, so they can get not only a competitive advantage against the United States, but also potentially threaten the U.S. food supply right here in America.
Well, I mean, how is it possible that U.S. trade negotiators are talking about a trade deal right now with their Chinese counterparts, and the Chinese are saying, we don't want you to have any limits on student visas, while at the same time, weeks apart, that we're seeing people who are students from China bring in these pathogens?
Maria, you bring up a good point. We have to monitor who's coming into this country, but we've also got to be able to hold them accountable on the front end. My new legislation, it's called the PLANT Act, Preventing Lethal Agriculture as a National Threat Act, would go after this, and it would make sure the Department of Justice has the tools to hold these guys accountable. 10 years in prison in a U.S. prison, up to 20 years with extended, and we do a much better job at the front end empowering Customs and Border Patrol, the Department of Justice, and USDA. These student visas are an effective Trojan horse into America's research institutions, if not done effectively. Right now, the Chinese already have over 500,000 acres of U.S. farmland. Our legislation's been able to put a stop to that. This is the next step in holding China accountable. Look, China's a trade partner. Let's recognize that. But let's also hold them accountable to being a good trade partner and not threaten U.S. national security under the auspice of trying to do research here in the United States, while actually looking at taking out agriculture that could be devastating for farmers and, frankly, helping feed the entire world.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know how, our lawmakers or trade negotiators are going to stop this. I mean, this is not the first time. We saw COVID, a COVID cover-up. We saw fentanyl.
Right.
And now we're seeing agroterrorism. What are they trying to do? Kill Americans right in plain sight?
I think they're actively, if not foolishly, looking at ways that they can get competitive advantage. Look, this isn't, for these 3 individuals, the FBI has already gone through their electronic devices, and they've determined that this was premeditated, that it was not the first time this type of espionage had been committed, and that this new form of agroterrorism came in everything from wrapping it in tissue paper, putting it in people's shoes, and transporting it to the United States. That's the type of just reckless, malicious behavior that could get out at any airport or into any field in the country. And the result is we would have a very difficult time being able to respond when this type of lethality makes contact with an open field here in the U.S.
Unbelievable. Really extraordinary stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to be following your work on this, sir. Meanwhile, the Senate is set to huddle with committee chairs today to discuss the technical corrections they need to make in the big, beautiful bill. House Republicans wrote to Senate Majority Leader John Thune urging the upper chamber to maintain the bill's fiscal framework and avoid any budget gimmicks. I spoke with House Republican Conference Chair Lisa McClain here yesterday. Watch. Do you have an expectation as far as when you'll get it back in the House after the Senate makes its changes?
What we're hearing right now is we'll get it back the last week in June, in time for us to get it passed by July 4th. Yeah, there are some family squabbles, but I think we've seen this movie before. So I'm optimistic that we're going to get this done by July 4th.
Congressman, are you expecting major changes once this gets back to the House?
Look, here's what I'm expecting off the bat. The same promises that Trump and House Republicans and Senate Republicans made was that we were going to secure the border, that we were going to have American energy independence, and that we were going to provide tax cuts to working class families and hometown businesses to help grow our economy. That's what's in this bill. We're working with the parliamentarian in the Senate today. We should have a heads up on some of the other things in there. But this is a 4th of July birthday present that the president's asked for. His ability to sign into law. The House stands ready to receive. I feel very confident that legislators on both chambers are going to be able to get this done.
Yeah, and in terms of the SALT deduction lifting there, you know, the senators are not, excited about leaving that in. If that's taken out or cut down from the 40,000 you all agreed upon and voted for, is that a dead on arrival situation once it gets back?
No, I don't think so. I think that this is something that particularly for, some of our blue state Republicans, they want to make sure that their priorities are heard. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of the forest through the trees here. Okay. We have 3 really important things we need to take care of. The president's promises, and it's something that we aim to deliver.
I want to get your take on what's going on in Los Angeles, Congressman. Anti-ICE protests continuing, stretching into a 6th day today as more American cities are seeing rioting and protest activity breaking out. A federal judge rejecting California Governor Gavin Newsom's emergency filing. He tried to block the president's militarization and sending the troops there, the National Guards there. The LAPD arrested dozens of rioters for refusing to follow Mayor Karen Bass's new curfew. Your reaction on what needs to be done here, and what should we think now that we see, breakouts of riots in places like Seattle and Chicago?
Look, I'm a proud combat veteran, and after my active duty time, I served with the National Guard in Iowa. It's some great young men and women who are standing up to defend their community when they've been called on not by their governor or even asked by their mayor, but by the president himself, because he heard from folks on the street. Americans needed help. The commissioner of the LAPD said there was violence on the street, and the governor was not responding. President Trump took the right step to make sure that our men and women in blue were backed up by men and women in fatigues. This is going to be true for any state in the country that allows this kind of danger where people will burn cars, commit arson, and instill anarchy while waving foreign flags while American businesses are looted, law enforcement bleeds, and the American flags are torn down. Look, there is absolutely a right to have your First Amendment speech, but when it goes, as other news agencies on the left have said, from rallies to become protests, to become rioting, the president probably saved a lot of lives by stepping in when he did this weekend to make sure this type of violence didn't spread.
All right, we'll be watching your work on that. Congressman, good to see you this morning. Thank you. Zach Nunn joining us.